So bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. My name is Lindsay Sikora, as Maddie mentioned. I am the head of the Health Sciences Library at the University of Ottawa, but I also am a knowledge synthesis methodologist. So literature reviews, scoping reviews, systematic reviews. I love all of it. And so one of the things I want to mention is that my pronouns are she, elle. And also, as Maddie said, si vous avez des questions en français, je peux les répondre. Thank you to Maddie for monitoring the chat since I really cannot see anything. So we're gonna get started today. My hope is that people like to share things and it won't be me talking for 2 hours straight, because that gets really monotonous for all of us. So my hope is that we can have some discussion, whether it's through the chat or you want to share vocally, whatever you like. I'm going to take off my my viewing just because I have some connection issues. But when we do an actual discussion, I'll turn it back on. But feel free if you want to or you don't want to, that's okay. So all right. So what we're going to do is we are going to chat today about literature reviews and scoping reviews and what is the difference and how do you know what the difference is. We will be doing another workshop probably next month on systematic reviews. So I don't want you to worry, we will be covering those as well. I do want to state I have no conflict of interest to declare. And so here's what we're going to do today. Our learning objectives, by the end of this workshop, I'm hoping that you'll evidently understand the difference between a literature review and a scoping review. I'm going to kind of talk to you about how to take your research question and break it down in a way that is feasible. And then it can also be, once it's feasible and broken down in a certain way, then it can be, translated into a database so that you can locate relevant results without so much noise that you can get if you don't know how to execute a search properly. That's really the focus of our 2 hours together today. So at the very, very start, if you are, there's kind of a spectrum of literature reviews that can be done. There's kind of like the quick and dirty background search that sometimes you need to do, whether you're with, whether you're at a patient's bedside or maybe you need to look something up really quickly. And so there are different resources that you can use. And so I just wanted to kind of remind you or let you know some of the tools that we do have at the University of Ottawa. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but I did want to mention that at the very top, you'll see a link right here, and it says mobile apps at your fingertips. We have what we call a research guide, which breaks down all the different types of mobile apps that you can get through the University of Ottawa that we've paid for so that you can kind of do point of care. So that is like the very quick and dirty type of search. We have Dynamed, which is very similar to UpToDate. And so, but we have Dynamed here at the University of Ottawa. And, it's a clinical tool that you can use just like UpToDate. Isabel is kind of like the opposite of Dynamed, where Dynamed is, already what the patient or the individual has. Isabel is kind of opposite, where if you are looking for a diagnosis and so you have multiple symptoms and you put them into Isabel, it will give you a list of potential conditions to check out, and then it links to Dynamed. And so that is also a really, really great tool to use if you're using them both together. There's also for all of the different pharmaceutical questions that you may have, we have access to the CPS or RxTX. And if you need a free tool to use that links to PubMed and also clinical practice guidelines and a whole bunch of other different types of tools and literature, the TRIP database is a free database that allows you to go into it and take a look at exactly all of this different information in one spot. So again, all of these apps are right at your fingertips at our research guide that I've put right at the very top of this slide. So let's just kind of get into it. What is a literature review? Everyone has different ideas of what they believe a literature review is. And sometimes these definitions can get a little mixed up because there are different methodologies for different types of reviews that you can do. But on the grand scale of things, a literature review is essentially when you have a topic that's been researched by established scientists, and then it's been published on. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to show their knowledge on this particular topic, but it shows their strengths and their weaknesses. Now, whether this is biased or unbiased, most of the time when you're doing a literature review and it's more of a narrative literature review, it's usually more unbiased, but we're going to talk about those details in a little bit. But I just wanted to give you an overview of what a literature review is considered. Oftentimes it has a wide scope, and the methodology when you're, looking for articles or collecting your data, there's not a standardized way that it's done in a literature review. And whereas in a systematic review or a scoping review, there are much more standardized practices that are done. Right. And so, in these other types of reviews, you have knowledge synthesis, you have search strategies, and it's very comprehensive. There is bias that's tried to be removed. And, in a literature review, you don't have an established protocol, whereas with scoping reviews and systematic reviews, you will often have a protocol, which is kind of like your game plan of what you're going to do for your research before you even get started, before you even start writing that manuscript or whatnot. Now, when you do a literature review, what happens sometimes is that it could be, for example, that you're doing this literature review just for the background section of maybe a commentary that you're writing, or maybe even just for some sort of short report or something. So that is a type of literature review, but it's very focused. And oftentimes, again, it doesn't have that, standardized methodology, and that's okay. Right? It's just you have to be aware of the different types of reviews that are out there and their purposes in order to understand when to use which one. So this figure right here, it kind of explains to you one way of looking how literature reviews are organized. So for example, if you have a literature review that is part of a larger body of work and it's very selective, you'll probably be writing an article, probably like an empirical article of some sort. If you have something that is a standalone and is selective, for example, this could be a short report. I put course assignment here, but it could be a short report as well, depending on what you're writing for. Then you have something that's a little bit more comprehensive. And if it's a standalone, this is usually where a review article of some sort falls into. And then oftentimes, if it's a larger body of work, sometimes like with our MD PhDs, for example, they could be writing a review as part of their thesis. When you're conducting a literature review on the higher scale, if we looked over what a literature review is, these are the steps for almost any type of review that you'll follow. But within each of these different colored steps, in reviews such as systematic reviews or scoping reviews, there's very strict protocols that you need to, and processes that you need to follow in order to follow the proper methodology. Whereas if you're conducting a more narrative literature review or a literature review that's perhaps for a background paper or something, they won't be as in depth. So right off the top, you will choose your topic, and this will be your research question. You go to collect the information. So at this phase, what people will do is they will go to a database. They might go to Google Scholar. They might go to, government websites. It really depends on what your research question is, but they will gather the information. And then what they'll start doing is they'll start reading it. They'll start shaping their ideas. In some cases, they may evaluate the research. And then they'll start structuring and writing. But oftentimes what happens is sometimes, you kind of go to this place here, whereas you're structuring and you're writing, you'll be like, maybe, my thought is too broad. Maybe my thought is too narrow, or maybe, you have to change ideas halfway through because maybe you found out, for example, that someone already has written on your topic. So oftentimes, we have these little gray areas that go backwards, because oftentimes you have to go right back to the start, or sometimes you just have to go back one notch because maybe you just need more articles or information on that topic. And again, there's an ebb and a flow to this that is specific to each individual project that you might be working on for your literature review. And as you're collecting the information, you'll also on the sideline try to manage your references. Now, some people might do this a little better than others. Some have what we call a citation manager. Other people like to keep their PDFs in a file folder. It doesn't really matter. It's just, and some might be a little bit more organized than others, but in the end, you have access to the references you need to start writing your review. Now, this could be what we're going to talk about today is this collecting information bit. I'm going to kind of help you go between choosing a topic to collecting information in a logical way that will hopefully ease so that when you manage your references, you don't have so many that you have to go through. You can get more to exactly what you're looking for. So I just wanted to show you, like I said, we're going to be talking about systematic reviews in our next session in November, but I did want to show you how a systematic review is different from a systematic approach, because sometimes people will say, I conducted a systematic literature review of the literature, of research. And oftentimes that can be very confusing because you're not sure if they mean that they did a systematic review or if they just tried to search the literature in a systematic way. And both of them are very different because, as I mentioned, systematic reviews have very specific criteria that you follow, and they have guidelines that they have written, like the Prisma 2020 statement that will tell you that will guide you on how to write a systematic review, in the sense of making sure there are certain items that you have listed to be transparent. Now, a literature review oftentimes doesn't have that. So as I mentioned, the systematic review will have those standards, but a systematic approach, it doesn't always have those different standards that we have to have. The question for a systematic review or even a scoping review is usually specific enough that it will have details on what you're looking for, whereas a systematic approach might be a little bit more vague, not vague, I should say, but more broad. Always with a systematic review, it is standard now that everyone has a protocol, which, as I mentioned, is kind of like it's the game plan of what they're going to do. For a systematic approach for a literature review, it is very rare that they would have this additional documentation before they just go into the literature review. When we say reporting, we mean that, did you follow Prisma 2020? So, it's very explicit. These are the databases that I searched. These are the number of articles I had per database. These are the number of articles we reviewed. Those are just some examples, but those are very explicit and they're written out in the protocol before you've even started your research project. Whereas in a systematic approach, they are encouraged. And this is a good example of, for those of you who are residents doing their FMRSP project, right? When you're not doing a systematic review, because a systematic review takes a very long time. As you can see at the bottom, the time frame is several months to a year. Whereas if you're doing a report, you can still it's encouraged to do it systematically. And so it's kind of like a hybrid of review, but the purposes are very different. And a systematic approach can be done in a much shorter amount of time. Okay. The scope for your systematic review or for your systematic approach, it can be iterative in a way, whereas a systematic review is, once you have that locked in your protocol, you cannot change it. All right. Like I said, a lit review can be biased depending on, the research topic. The search oftentimes, it's limited depending on how many databases you search, what words you search for. And, sometimes there's a synthesis and an appraisal with a systematic approach. And I'm sure all of you are like, that's awesome. Great. Thank you for that theoretical backup. But how do I put this into practice, which is really the crux of this entire conversation that we're having today. So I did pull an example that I'd like to use, and just to show you how, if you have a research question or a research statement, in this case, how can you break it down into concepts so that when you go into a database, that you are able to say, okay, these are the elements that I need to pull out to put into my search strategy. So a 15-year-old patient comes into your office wanting to know the best treatment for her depression. Now, here with the PICO, the Pico framework, this is just one framework that you can use. There's Pico, there is the Pico T, there's Pico S, there's so many different frameworks. I chose this Pico framework because this is a clinical question. So it works well because the population, the P, is depression in adolescence, okay? My intervention, the I, is antidepressant medication. My comparator, which is the C, is the cognitive behavioral therapy. These are the two treatment options that I've decided to investigate in my question. And my outcome is that I would like to, which is the O, I'd like to improve the symptoms of depression for this patient. So one way to break down this question, all right, is to kind of create we call this a worksheet. And what I've done is you'll see on the left-hand side, concept 1 for me is teenager, because that is the age of our population. Concept 2 is the antidepressant medication. And concept 3 is cognitive behavioral therapy. So I've decided to visually represent my question this way, which will really help me as I start to think about the synonyms that I need for each concept. And this is important because a lot of the time when I have different individuals who come to me and say, I'm doing my search in PubMed or, another database, but I always get so much noise, so many articles that are irrelevant. And I feel that pain so much. And so this is usually, or they'll come to me and say, I'm just not getting the articles that I need. Why can't I get it? And it could be that you're just using the wrong words, right? So like when someone goes to describe a teenager, other ways to describe teenagers is adolescence or teens or youth or teenage or adolescence, the age group, not just the person. So these are like synonyms, like terms, or synonyms that you need to come up with because your article that you might be missing may be using another word to describe the population that you're looking for. So this is one example. And so what we want to do is we want to do the same thing for concept 2. I use the term antidepressant medication, but it can also be called antidepressant drugs or antidepressant agents. Now, if you're looking at a specific group of drugs, maybe you're looking at SSRIs or any type, or a specific drug itself, this would also be a concept that you might, or a term that you might consider adding with all the different names that the drug has. So the brand name and the generic name you might want to add them to your search as well. And then for the third one, cognitive behavioral therapy is pretty straightforward, but you will notice that behavioral, for example, can be spelt the American way or the Canadian way, with a U or without a U. So spelling is also an important consideration when you're going to go searching for your different articles. Now here we also have CBT. Oftentimes people like to use an acronym. I'm hesitant to use acronyms because this is one way to generate a lot of noise in your search. So oftentimes I won't add it to my search strategy because when we search the title and the abstract and we use MESH, medical subject headings, in our search, if we use the full term, it is very rare. I haven't really seen it where they've only used the acronym in something like that. So it's just a word of caution. I'm not saying not to use it. I'm just saying it might be a cause for why perhaps you're getting a lot of noise if you're using an acronym. So this is just another search strategy worksheet example of what we just went through together. Because this is something that you can actually print off of one of our pages on our website, on the library's website, that I will share. So that if you wanted to print it off and you wanted a visual, you can do it this way as well. I put in depression in this one. because I didn't want it for anxiety, for example, which sometimes can be used with antidepressants as well. But, depending on how specific you want to get, this is just another way to show how you can break down your research question. So before I go into my demo, I am wondering if there are any questions so far from you guys. Looks like there's nothing in the chat. Okay. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to go into, we're not going to go into a really in-depth search today. I want to show you a search, a database that you can use to get started. Okay. And so instead of going into PubMed, which has, mesh and keywords and all that kind of stuff, because you are all affiliated with the University of Ottawa, you have access to our list of databases. We have a database. Oh, does someone have a question, or just are they off mute by accident?
I think they were off mute by accident.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. No problem. Okay. So one of the things that you can use instead of just PubMed is it's a new resource that I wanted to introduce you to today, and it's called Scopus. Scopus is a multidisciplinary database. So what that means is that there are journals that are in PubMed that are very obviously medical in expertise and touches on some other subjects around health. But what's nice about Scopus is that it not only includes all the journals from PubMed, but it also includes on top of that other journals that might not be indexed in PubMed. So it gives you it'll give you access to potentially more articles on your topic, but how can we search it in a way that allows us to, again, not get all of that noise? So this is one database besides PubMed that I wanted to introduce you to today. So if you go to so right now on my screen, I'm showing you the library's homepage. So if you go to the library's homepage, the easiest way to get access to our databases is underneath here, our databases A to Z list. And so what we can do is there's different ways that you can access it. Here, you can either type in the name Scopus, you can go to the S here and go to Scopus, or we do have a frequently used list here, and you'll see that Scopus is the second one. So if I click on it, what'll happen is this screen will change shortly, but your login information will not change. So I'm going to connect to get into Scopus. So what I like about Scopus is that it's pretty straightforward as a database to use. So what I mean by that is you'll see right here that any terms you put into the search bar here, it'll search the title, the article title, the abstract, and any keywords that the author has provided. All right. And so some people use this search toolbar here like a Google search, and they just type in everything. I'm going to show you a different way that will hopefully reduce the amount of noise that you get, and we get more accurate articles. So if we go back, and you'll see in our search, we have a 15-year-old patient. So our first term that we would probably want to search would be our term for adolescence. So as we said, one of the terms that we use to describe adolescence is teenager. So teenage, teenagers, teenager. So what you can do in Scopus is you can type in teen. Now, if you put a star at the end of teen, it will grab any ending after the end. So instead of having to type in teen or teens or teenager or teenage, by putting the asterisk or the star, it will automatically grab all of those words for you. All right. And so we would want to say, or adolescent, adolescence, adolescent, etc. I feel as though, yes, I did. So spelling is important, as you can see. So if we go back to our, here we go, our Scopus screen. Okay, I'm going to put in E. So then, and then it can be or youth or youths. So as you can see, instead of like putting everything onto one, excuse me, onto one search box, okay, in one search field, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to say, I would like to add another search field. And this will go very similar to how we did our, how we built it in our search strategy worksheet. So, you know, when I said I would like antidepressant, I can say antidepressant or antidepressants, because there were so many like drugs or agents or medication. If I just leave it like this, I will automatically grab any of those words afterwards. But one of the things that we should bear in mind is that it can also be with a hyphen between. Okay. So it's important to make sure that you know the different spellings when you add them to a database. It won't be the end all be all, but it's just something that you might want to kind of consider if you're not quite getting the articles that you want, because it could be spelled differently. And then for our last one, what we would want to do is the cognitive behavioral therapy. So we would say cognitive behavioral, because it's with a U or without a U, I'm just going to put the asterisk after the V. And then because it can be therapy or therapies, I put the star after the P. Are there any questions on this process? Okay. So then I'm going to hit search. So here you'll see now, nobody wants to go through 1,100 articles. I know that. Okay. But this is kind of the first step. So what I like to do is I'd like to see, is it getting some of the articles that I want? So juvenile primary fibromyalgia syndrome. Okay. The efficacy of positive psychotherapy in reducing negative. Okay, maybe. So if you wanted to see more about a particular article, what you can do is you can click into it, and oftentimes you'll have the abstract that's located right here. Okay, so you can take a look at the abstract to see if if this is exactly what you want. Sometimes there'll be like a little green unlock sign here. And what that means is sometimes if it's open access, you can view the PDF right away. If this little green on the right-hand side, this little lock is red and locked, what you'll have to do is you'll need to go up here where it says Affiché Get It, because that then will link you to our library's catalog like this. And you'll be able to tell if we have access to the PDF through our catalog as well. Because sometimes the databases like BMJ Open will link up with the PDF automatically. Other times, even though we have access to the PDF through Scopus, it won't. So if you're worried about getting it and you can't access it through the view PDF this way, by hitting the Get It Affiché button, that is just another way that you can see that it's available online, and you can click on any one of these links to have access to the database or to the PDF. So if we go back, so there are a lot of different options here. So there are a few ways that we can reduce these numbers to kind of hone in a little bit more on the different articles that we would want, just to like get some less articles and less results. So one of the ways is that on the left-hand side here, we have what are called limits or filters. So what we can do is we can say, you know what, I really want articles that are only in English. So if I click on language and I say, I only want English articles, it's not going to bring it down by a lot, but we can say limit to. And so by default, it'll limit to only the English articles. So that's one way to do it. And you can keep adding different limits. Maybe you only want 2021, etc. But sometimes these limits don't have exactly what we need. So what we can do is we can edit our search. Okay, and we can go to the basic search where we want to edit our search. So as I mentioned, right now, the database is searching the article title, abstract, and keywords. So sometimes when I'm trying to get a feel for the literature or find articles that are directly what I'm looking for, instead of searching all three of these, I'll just sometimes just go to the article search. Because if it's mentioned in the article search, to me, it probably means that it's more what I'm looking for. So I would change to article title and hit search. So then that brings me down to 4. So again, you want to be cautious when you do this because you can go from 1100 to 4. But right now we're just trying to see what's out there. So this is the type of search that you would do when you're perhaps doing a background search, or you don't need to be as comprehensive because you're just trying to get a feel for the literature and find some articles for kind of on the corner of your desk type of searching to help back up something or maybe find something for a patient. So here you'll see the cost effectiveness of CBT for depressive use is declining antidepressants, cognitive behavioral therapy in primary care for youth, declining antidepressants. So it looks like it's hit exactly on the 3 concepts that I want. So I could look at these, and their third option kind of might answer the question that I'm looking for. Okay. Is cognitive behavioral therapy an effective complement to antidepressants in adolescence? And it's a meta-analysis. So because it's a meta-analysis, I know that it should be considered very high quality. So what I can do is then I'll look at the abstract and I would read the abstract and I would decide if this is an article that I would like or not. Now, something else that I really like about Scopus that, PubMed does have, but so for example, sometimes PubMed at the bottom, all the references that are used in this particular meta-analysis, they're all listed here. And sometimes Medline does have that option, which is really, really great. Okay, you can see that, their reference list is here. But one of the really, really great options as well with Scopus that PubMed does not have is this option called cited by. So what I like about the option of cited by is since this article has been published in 2011, 10 other articles, whether it be review articles or empirical articles, whatever, have cited this particular study. So what you can do is you can click on that number and it will give you the list of articles that have used this article when it's been published. And so you can start seeing, dropout of RCTs, they have management of depression in primary care, and these are all really recent articles as well. So I will warn you though, that this is like going down a rabbit hole. So sometimes you can forget where you started. So you might just want to keep track of what your original article was before you go down this rabbit hole to find all the different types of other studies that you can do. But I really like this strategy because it does show, under this one here, CBT in primary care for youth declining antidepressants, an RCT, right? It's been cited 22 times. So these also might be relevant. So when you are searching for, when you're kind of doing that, you're not quite doing a super in-depth review, like a systematic review or a scoping review, but you do want to have some sort of strategy that you can employ that's somewhat in a systematized way when you're doing research for a narrative review, or, if you're looking for things for commentary or short reports or your FMRSP project, for example, this is one strategy and one database that you can use to kind of help you get started and go through the different resources, because it searches all the different databases and journals that PubMed has, plus more. Are there any questions on the searching or on Scopus before we continue?
Hi. Yes. Hi, my name's Erica Tanner. I'm one of the family docs who takes residents. Sorry. Question, you said keep track of this as we're going down the rabbit hole. Can you just demonstrate how to do that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for your question, Erica, for sure. So for example, let's say if we go back to this study right here, number 3, I'm like, this is a great one. One of the ways that I like to keep track is that I sometimes just create a really quick and dirty Excel sheet, right? So then I would say, like in my Excel sheet, I might say something like, if I open, I'm just going to open up Google Drive and I'll create something really quick just to kind of show you. So new Google Sheets. Okay, so what I might do, for example, is I might go into Scopus and I would say, okay, so this is the title, and I would say, okay, this is the title of the article. And then under the title, I would, sorry, I'm just going to wrap this, do some text wrapping, right? So under title, I might say number of citations cited by, and then I would say, so I know that here they have 10. So I would say 10, and then I would, over here, I might say relevant articles for my review. I mean, this is just one way of doing it, you know, because I think it's just important to kind of keep track, especially if you have to discuss what your methods were, you know, even in a systematized literature review, sometimes people will, you know, or like if you're doing an FMRSP project, right? Sometimes you have to describe the methods that you used. And so what we're doing right now, this is called citation analysis or forward citation analysis, because what you're doing is you're taking a study and you're looking forward since it's been published in 2011 at the different articles that have used it in as one of their references. All right. And so one way to keep track, because what happens is when you use this strategy of forward citation analysis, your point is eventually to hit saturation, like keep seeing the same articles over and over and over again, right? Because that means then you know that you've done a good job at looking at research in one area. So what I like to do, and that you don't have to do it to this level, I just wanted to show you one way to track it. One of the things I might do is I might say, oh, this one here is a really good example. So I might just kind of copy it and I would put more of the citation information, like the title, you know, the authors, like essentially like where did it come from, you know, author, journal, volume, issue, page number. Like I would put that type of citation information in here and then just kind of keep a little list. So nothing too fancy, it just helps me organize my thoughts. Other people I've seen where all they've done is, you know, they've looked at this list and they have like what's that in English? A folder, a folder. And what they've done is they've just gone to get the PDFs and then they go through this whole list, get all the PDFs, just dump them into the folder and then go back to their original list and then go look at the 22, for example. So it's just different ways of keeping track of the articles that you've already looked at. So you don't feel like you're looking at the same ones again and again and again. But so that's just one example. Does that answer your question, Erica?
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Are there any other questions that I can answer at this point? Okay. Like I said, don't hesitate to interrupt me at any point. That's okay. Okay. So that is using the database Scopus. You can use similar features in PubMed. We're not going to talk about that right now. That's going to be in our systematic review workshop. But you can use similar features where you just search, for example, the title in PubMed using the same type of words here that we used. And that's why I wanted to show you Scopus, because the skills that we learned in Scopus are transferable to PubMed. Are transferable to PubMed, where you can actually use the searching the title or maybe just searching the abstract, again, depending, in order to kind of narrow down that huge list that you might get in PubMed of articles that are not relevant. Okay. So we did our demo. So I've kind of talked a little bit about the differences between a literature review and a systematic review. But one of the questions I have for you guys, if you're up for maybe a little chat, is what do you know about what a scoping review is? please, not all at once. That's okay. All right, so let's talk about that. What is a scoping review? How is it different from a systematic review? How is it different from a literature review? A scoping review, the purpose of a scoping review is to be more exploratory in nature, because you're trying to understand, here it says better to understand a phenomena. So an example of that would be, there's a gap in the literature and, you want to identify that gap and show where that gap is. Okay. Or maybe you're trying, another example of one of the purposes of a scoping review is that you're trying to streamline a definition of a term, for example. One of the scoping reviews that I've done in the past has been a scoping review on the term self-regulation, because it's used in so many different ways. And so, a few years ago, I was part of a team that looked at that. And so a scoping review aims to address broader questions so that we can understand the gap in literature or, those kind of things, and then evaluate if there's research or not on it and where we should go from there. I see that there's a question in the chat. Just give me 1 second. And so what we do is, just like a systematic review, we use rigorous methods to kind of, look at the literature. We look at the volume, the characteristics, and then we determine where the gaps in the literature are located. En français, on dit un revue de la portée. Yeah, a revue de la portée, or on utilise examen aussi, mais la plupart du temps, c'est un revue de la portée. J'ai vu aussi que c'était revue de portée. Il y a différentes expressions qu'on utilise, mais ici, à l'Université d'Ottawa, la plupart du temps, on utilise, au Canada, j'ai vu revue de la portée. But that's a great question. Merci, Anne-Marie. So, what are the steps involved in a scoping review? So very similar to a systematic review, for those of you who may know the review, but if not, that's okay. So you're going to formulate a research question, and you want that question to be, it can be broader, it can be a little bit narrow, but you don't want it to be vague. And so that part is really important, to make sure that it's well formulated as a question so that people are not wondering what you mean. So what we want to do as our second step is that scoping reviews require a protocol. Okay. Now, it used to be that they didn't really require one, but more and more across different disciplines, it's almost becoming second nature to also write a protocol for your scoping review, which is kind of your game plan, so that if something changes, people who have read your protocol, because oftentimes protocols are published as their own, as like a standoff from the main manuscript. Okay. People will know what you're doing. And if something happens that needs to be changed or amended, for whatever reason, when you go to write your actual scoping review, you can say, here's how it differs from my protocol, which was the original game plan. Okay. But you're still going to perform searches in a very systematic way, and you'll plan your review. And so when you do your literature searching, you select the databases that you want right off the bat. Sometimes you'll have date limits, other times you won't. We'll talk about what gray literature is. I will touch on what that is exactly as we go through the different steps. Because once you've done your literature searching and you've gathered all of your, the articles that you want to search, then you need to start screening them. And so it's recommended that you only do screening of the title and the abstract first, because if you have like 1,000 articles that you have to go through, you don't want to have to read 1,000 full text papers, especially when a lot of those articles won't even be articles you want to include for your scoping review. So if you start by just doing the screening of titles and abstracts, you can decide what will stay and what will go. And for the ones that you decide to stay, you want to go obtain the full text of those papers so that you'll start a second round of screening of the full text. And then just like step 4, once you've screened all the full text papers, and you'll decide again what will stay and what will go. For the ones that you've decided to stay, this is where you're going to start you're going to chart the data and do the data extraction. Okay, so what does the data look like? What are the themes that are showing up? And you need to loop that back to answer your research question. There is no quality assessment when you're doing a scoping review because that's not the purpose. The purpose is not to assess the quality. It's to look at the findings, sometimes in a thematic way or other ways of analysis, in order to answer the research question and to synthesize that data that you're getting from the papers. All right. So that when you go to write it up and disseminate it, you're disseminating it to the proper audience, depending again on what your research question is. So here are some important distinctions between a systematic review and a scoping review. So in a scoping review, your question will often be broad. Now here it says the protocol is maybe for a scoping review. I put maybe because depending on the field, oftentimes you don't have to do one, but this is becoming more less and less so, I should say, where many people in different fields, it's becoming more accepted and even almost mandatory to write a protocol for scoping reviews. When you do the search, it is systematic and transparent, just like a systematic review. The criteria, as I mentioned, in a systematic review, it's defined up front. You cannot change it. So by criteria, I mean, what is your inclusion? What are you including? But also, what are you excluding in your review? With a scoping review, you do have some flexibility with that, okay, depending on the research question. Oftentimes, it's up to a certain point. Or the team, I'm sorry, may decide up to a certain point. Like, let's say, initially they wanted to search only 2 databases, but then halfway through, as they're thinking about it and doing the searching and finding their articles, there's another database that they've decided would be a nice complement to their research question. And so they decide to search that. So you do have some, whereas with a systematic review, you couldn't do that. So it does have some flexibility on the process that you can follow up to a certain point. There is no critical appraisal done in a scoping review. Again, that's not the purpose of a scoping review, and we'll talk about that in a second. Oftentimes, the synthesis, of a scoping review is qualitative. It may have some descriptive statistics, okay, but it won't have, for example, a meta-analysis. It'll be more qualitative in nature. So one of the biggest questions that I get is that people always have trouble deciding, am I doing a systematic review or am I doing a scoping review? There's a great article that has been written by Munn and colleagues in 2018. And I have put all the references for this presentation at the very end of the presentation. So you can go and get these articles if you want to. And what they've done is they've done a really nice job of kind of charting the differences between these types of reviews. So scoping review, as I mentioned, it's one of the main purposes is to identify the types of available evidence in a given field. Is there a gap that needs to be identified in a field? Okay. And so that is what will often make a question a little bit more broad. All right. Another purpose could be is to examine how research is conducted in a certain topic or field. One of the scoping reviews that was recently done in medical education that I'm working on with a group in medical education is that they're looking at how elicitation techniques are used in interviewing, right? What elicitation techniques are out there besides just regular interviews? So that is, and they're looking at it specifically, how is it used in medical education, right? So that's an example of kind of looking how research is done in a certain field. Also, for example, they're looking at how to clarify definitions or key concepts in the literature. If the question is broad enough, sometimes if there's enough data, a scoping review will identify that there's enough data identified to do a systematic review. Okay. So, as opposed to a systematic review, that often will look at how to confirm current practices, or it will confirm current practice or address any variations. It's very much looking at an intervention oftentimes, not always an intervention or an exposure, and what it does is, if there's conflicting results, that's why if someone says chocolate is good and another person says chocolate is bad, well, what's the real answer, right? So they'll often investigate these conflicting results, was red wine good or bad for us, that kind of thing. But oftentimes also systematic reviews are really used to help produce statements that guide decision making. For example, they'll be used for clinical practice guidelines as well. So I just wanted to kind of show you the different purposes that have been identified for systematic versus scoping reviews. But obviously, if you have any type of questions like this, you can definitely reach out to the librarians at the Health Sciences Library, because we can sit down with you and really talk you through this process on which one am I doing, how is one different from the other, etc. So what are the considerations that you need to take into account when you're actually conducting a scoping review? So this is really about managing expectations. I'm going to go into the steps more in depth about the steps of a scoping review, but before you even, start, getting into the steps and searching the databases and all that kind of stuff, these are a couple of things that you really need to consider, because undertaking a scoping review is a massive body of work. It's a massive amount of work. So you want to think about who is going to be on your review team. If you know that you're doing a scoping review that might be a little bit smaller in nature, that you don't anticipate a lot of results, you might not need as many people on your review team. Whereas if one of the grants that I was on that got funded through SSHRC was online learning in all environments, and what are best practices, and during the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is really big. So we had to pull in a lot of members, a lot of researchers, a lot of content experts, a lot of graduate students, and 2 librarians to be able to search this level of information, because we had over 15,000 citations that we had to look at. So your review team will depend on your research question. In the end, you will always find that it will come down to feasibility and how big your research question is. So I just wanted to kind of outline some of the key players that will play a role in your review team. And you also need to think about budget, because, most scoping reviews or systematic reviews are not funded by CHR or other foundations. And so when you think about it, a lot of these type of reviews are done not on the corner of your desk, because you can't do a review like a scoping review on the corner of your desk, but it is oftentimes people who are not getting paid for this type of work, right? So, staffing is always a consideration. Do I need to hire a research coordinator or a research assistant? Sometimes document acquisition, so, articles. We're lucky at the university that, or even through TOH, that you don't have to have, you don't often have to pay for articles, because we can also often get them for free through our interlibrary loan service that we have. But not everyone has access to these type of services. It's also translation. Sometimes, like if you have a French and an English speaker, that's great. But if a lot of your research has been done in Chinese, if you're doing genetic information or, other languages, not including an article that's only in German, for example, it doesn't introduce a publication bias, because you can't include that information. Even if it's a small bias, it could affect your review. So that's just something to be aware of. Oftentimes you also need to use software, so citation management software or systematic review software for screening. So we do have citation software and citation management software and systematic review software we'll talk about in December, because at the University of Ottawa, we fully support Zotero, which is actually a free citation management software. And you have access to, for free as well, Covidence or Covidence, depending on how people pronounce it. And it is something that we've subscribed to here at the University of Ottawa, and we fully support, so we can lend you guidance for that as well. And then there's the dissemination, where we encourage everyone to consider open access for their for their dissemination, so that it's not behind a paywall, so that, especially if your review is going to influence patient care, you want your patient to be able to have access to it. And if it's behind a paywall, they can't get it by just Googling it and then pulling it up. So this is why, but open access is expensive. So again, what are the resources and what are the different ways that you can kind of go to use open access? And that's something we're going to talk about in our January session together. The other thing is timeline. It could take up to 12 months or more to do a scoping review, sometimes less if you have, you're able to dedicate more time to it, but it can take a long time, especially based on how complex your research question is and what deadlines you have. So those are some considerations. And also bear in mind, especially with the pandemic that's been going on, it has been much harder to get articles or any type of, article or report or whatever published in a quote unquote timely manner, because it has to be peer reviewed. It has to be, go through, different editorial processes, and it can take time. So that is also something to consider when you want to go publish your scoping review, or at this point, really anything, but especially a scoping review. And its feasibility, right? Your research question is going to determine a huge part of the feasibility for all of the other managing expectations that we just talked about. So these are the steps in a scoping review, but they are very similar to the steps in a systematic review, which you will see next month. So we like to use the PIECES acronym. So back in 2017, there were two librarians, Foster and Jewell, that wrote a book on how librarians can, write a systematic review. Literally, it laid it all out. And this was the acronym that they used. And we found it was really good for teaching because people like a good acronym and they can remember it. So the first step is the planning process, right? When you are planning your review, you want to make sure that there are no other reviews that have been done on your topic, right? That's pretty important. So not only do you need to consider if there are published reviews, but you also need to go look at different spots for protocols, because publishing systematic and scoping review protocols is also common practice now for them to be published. And so you need to make sure you have to check a few different sources, the Cochrane collaboration, the Cochrane library, the Campbell collaboration, which is like the Cochrane library, where it's peer reviewed, but it's more for social sciences. So education, social work, mental health, etc. There is also, just going through PubMed and there's a systematic review filter on PubMed that you can use, and you can look that way. We're going to talk about preprints and all that kind of stuff later, but you just want to make sure that nobody is published on your topic previously. If they have, you don't have to say, oh, I can't do this. One of the things that you can consider is that for example, if the review is 5, 6, 7 years old, it probably needs to be updated. So you can still do a review, but maybe you're just going to update the previous review. So there's ways around it. And I suggest that you really talk to a librarian as you're getting started with these steps, especially if you've never done a scoping review before. You want to have your team in place as you are, prepping your review, and you want them to help you write that review protocol. So again, you can just make sure that you've considered all the different steps, and who's going to be on your team. You can kind of have an idea of the timeline. You have the content experts and the methodology experts to kind of help you walk you through this whole process. The I is identifying. So what you want to do is you want to be able to identify, you have your research question, you sat down with the librarian and they're like, yes, your research question makes sense. So now we want to take that question, just like we did earlier. We want to translate the question and break it down on the search strategy worksheet so that then it can be conducted in the different databases and in the supplemental searches. So supplemental searches it includes gray literature. It includes the strategy like the forward citation analysis we talked about. It could be just as simple as well as just looking at the reference list of some of the articles that you know you really answer your research question. So there's different strategies for that. And the databases and the different strategies you would use all depends on the research question. And you want to document the process. So this is where statements like the Prisma statement, which we will talk about more so next week, but essentially it's a guideline on what you should keep track of. And as you're going through writing a scoping review. And what's great about it is that they have a checklist that says, hey, make sure, like, do you have this? Do you have this? Do you have this? For each section of a scoping review, like introduction, do you have this and this and this? For your methods, do you have this and this and this? For your results, do you have this and this and this? So that's what I mean by documenting the process, because there is a Prisma that is specific to doing a scoping review. It came out at I believe it was 2018. And so it's a great resource to use just to make sure that you don't miss anything. The first E stands for evaluating. So this is where you're going to screen, step one would be screening the title and the abstracts to exclude any of the irrelevant studies that you know that you don't want. And then you'll do your next screening process of reading the full text of those articles before you decide to do your extraction. Now, as I mentioned, you don't do a critical appraisal in a scoping review. This is not a step that we do. This is a step that we do in a systematic review. The C is collecting and combining data. So oftentimes before you even, start your screening, or sometimes you do it concurrently, but you're going to have an idea of the data that you would like to pull out of these articles, right? So whether it's the methods or a certain intervention or an exposure, anything like that. So I recommend having like a draft of your data extraction form, which would have, again, it could be a simple Excel sheet that has, it says populate, like number of people, number of patients that, was used for a study. It could be the number of, like, does it have children? Yes or no, right? So again, it'll be dependent on your research question and what you're trying to pull out of the different articles. Sometimes if you're doing a medical education scoping review, it could be what are the types of educational strategies that they used. So again, having an idea of the data that you would like to pull, and that's the type of information that will also go into your protocol. So you're already thinking about this way before you've even started doing your screening and stuff. And then what you're going to do is you're going to think about how you can combine. Here I say combine data in a detailed table, but what I mean by that is, what is the story that you're trying to tell with your tables, right? Do you want to show how many, like, of your included articles? Do you want to show how many participants there were? Do you want to show how many education interventions they were? So again, the tables that you use and the figures that you use need to help tell the story of the review that you're writing. Right? That's because, visuals are great, but you want to make sure that they make sense to go with what you're trying to accomplish. The second E stands for explaining the synthesis. So once you've done your results of extracting the data and looking at them, and maybe you have descriptive stats and that kind of thing, then you want to put it together. You want to describe them. What does this mean, right? How are they reported? What could the story tell now and going into the future? What does that look like? Okay. In a systematic review, for example, this is often done with additional statistics, but in a scoping review, we don't have those stats. All right. So you want to make sure that as you are presenting your themes, for example, that could be one way that you've decided to explain, to synthesize your results. Right? What does it mean? Why is it important? Tell me why I'm looking at this and why it matters. Lastly, the S is summarizing. So you'll write your review, but in your discussion, right? if you've tailored your review for a particular audience, you would write, going forward, maybe these are some of the other areas that we need to explore, and here's why. If you're looking to, for example, to inform a policy, right? Or to say, this educational strategy is most used in this school setting. Here's why. Here's something else we might want to consider for, perhaps children that have special needs. I don't know. But the point of the matter is how can you relate it back to everyday life in a practical way? Okay. So these are all different pieces that you need to consider when you're writing your review. And I can imagine it feels very daunting if you've never done one. And you're not wrong. But that being said, there are people at the library that can help you get started, that can kind of walk you through the process of certain things, send you resources. It'll involve a lot of reading at the very top, but it's not, if we can get that protocol underway and kind of do it these steps, it'll save you from having to go back and redo things, which will just create more time. Because in the end, our job at the library, and your job as a researcher, is to do this as effectively as possible, whether it's for a scoping review or even just a literature review, right? Not just a literature review, but also a literature review. To do it in a way that is meaningful and not a way for you to have to go back and change things. And I don't want to say waste time, but, guard your time properly. So both of these, this summary is not just for a scoping review, but it's also important for any type of literature you want to do, because you want to consider the different factors. So for a literature review, right, if I'm going to use a database, is PubMed my best database? There's maybe going to a database like Scopus a better way to do it, because it searches a little bit differently and has that, cited by feature that PubMed doesn't have. So maybe that's a different place to start, for example. You do want to be realistic. I often have people that come in and think that they can do a scoping review in 3 months, but they don't have the resources, or they don't have 5 people dedicated to doing just that. So again, you need to make sure that you have the time, that you have the proper help, right? And be very clear on your purpose, because if you're clear on your purpose and the outcomes that you want to look at, that'll ensure that your project will go much more smoothly. All right. Under the exhaustive, when you're searching, it's a fine balance, especially when you're doing gray literature. The fine balance for gray literature is, knowing when to stop. So gray literature is essentially anything that is not in a database, that is not commercially available. So that would be, for example, government reports. It can be theses or dissertations. It can be newspaper articles. It can be short reports or white papers. It's essentially anything, podcasts, for example, even, right? So anything that is not in a commercial database in your traditional bibliometrics, or through a database with all of the different metrics that you use, right? And so we are definitely going to focus more on that part either today, because I think we'll have some time for questions and discussion, but definitely something that we go over in depth in our systematic review workshop. And I mean, I know I've plugged this a couple of times, but as librarians, we'd really like to help you in this, and we know how to help you to make it be more achievable for you. So I suggest that under that handy little hyperlink right there, that you connect with us so that we can help you with your search.
Lindsay,
Yes.
I have a follow-up question. Can you provide perhaps a bit more details about how the librarians can support within their role for the scoping review? So are you helping out with developing the search strategy, and then perhaps helping out with some of the screening? What is the extent of support that you can offer within the library services?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, for sure. So yeah, so what typically happens is, regardless of if you're a new person to doing a review, or if you've done a couple of reviews before, some of the steps that we do at the library. So initially what we would do is we would meet you for a consultation. So if you are new to doing a review, what we would do ahead of time is we would provide you with some resources, so some articles to read, some some resources like this one right here that I'll talk about in just a second. You know, we have some research guides. So we would provide you with essentially some homework that you would need to do beforehand, before meeting with us to have a consultation, because our expectation is that when you walk through our door, if you have questions on how to do a review, that's not a problem. But we do want you to be somewhat educated when you come through the door, so that we can really help you with your specific project, and it's not necessarily education from the top. Now, that being said, we will absolutely, if you have any questions, you can obviously message us beforehand. You can definitely, and for faculty, it's a little bit different with students, because with students, we often have educational sessions, but if faculty want educational sessions as well on kind of what we did today on how to do a review, we do that as well. So you can come to us with any questions. And what we do is case by case, we kind of figure out where the researcher is at, and then we kind of help them from there. As far as the consultation, like, do we need to provide them homework ahead of time, or do they already, you know, kind of have some experience with this? So, you know, what we need to do first as librarians is gauge the experience that the researcher has. Once we've done that, we can have a sit down with the consultation with the researcher or the student. And what we do is, if you come to us with your research question, our hope is that when you come to us, you've thought a little bit about, you know, what your research question is. You have like kind of a background, like a rationale on why you would want to do this type of research, you know, what your inclusion criteria is versus your exclusion. So that means, you know, like maybe you want pediatrics under the age of 18 with a certain condition, but you only want RCTs. So your exclusion criteria would be observational studies, for example. So, you know, if you don't have that, that's okay. You know, you definitely need your research question. And one of the things might happen is we might sit down with you and be like, your research question is way too vague, or it's too broad for what you want to accomplish. So we kind of guide you through those steps in the first consultation, just to make sure that everything is kind of on par. So then what happens after this is two things. It can go kind of two ways. The first way is that the researcher doesn't have enough information, so they need to go back and kind of do some more homework, create a protocol, you know, and think a little bit more about it. And then they can come back to the librarian, and then we can have a discussion on searching and, you know, how they can search. But before we hit the searching part, the other thing too is that one of the services that we do offer at the library is what we call our knowledge synthesis services. So knowledge synthesis is essentially like systematic reviews, literature reviews. It's just an umbrella term for all the different types of reviews that can be done. And so at the Health Sciences Library, we offer a service where we would conduct we would act as the methodologist as a partner and a collaborator on the scoping review or systematic review that the researcher does. We have a policy that outlines this. And what happens is that we would do the searching for the researcher, along with guiding them through other steps of the review. And we would do the searching in all the databases. We would help them write the protocol. We would help them. We would then look at how the manuscript is written, that kind of thing. You know, we would write a huge chunk of the method section that they're doing. We do not do screening. We just don't have the capacity to do screening, nor do we, you know, if they need help pulling PDFs, that's not a service we offer either. We can guide you on those things. We guide you through the gray literature as well, but we don't do the gray literature. So it's really a collaboration. But if for students, for example, we don't offer this service, we do consult with them. We walk them literally step by step on how to search, and we walk them. And if they need to come back for, you know, they need more help, we'll peer review the search for them as well. But for faculty members, we will do the search. And if they are like, where we're identified as co-author, that's kind of the level at it. And I can share that policy if you want. But really what it comes down to is, depending which way you want to go, we will always provide services on how to search, once or twice or three times, right? You can ask us questions we're always here for that. But if it is for like, for example, for the FMRSP projects, we don't do the search because the purpose of writing, like it's an educational purpose and our mission is to teach. So unless, not unless, I'm sorry. So for the FMRSP projects, we will guide you through how to search and just 1 or 2 databases, nothing crazy. And now you guys know how to search through Scopus. So really it's just one other database to be, to have that experience. So that's kind of an overview of it. If there are specific questions about, do you provide this service or that service, I'm happy to answer those. So I hope, we also, one of the other things too, is like, if you don't know where to publish, we can like guide you through that process, right? What is open access? How do I use Covenants? How do I use Zotero? Like all those services we offer as well. I hope that answers your question, Maddie.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is a research guide. It links out to essentially everything that I just talked about for a systematic review. We're in the middle of doing one for a scoping review. It's just not done yet. But you can see here that the PIECES acronym is here, and literally a lot of the details that I will go over next week that are pretty similar for a scoping review as well, they're all here. So I just wanted to bring you through in case you wanted to, you'll get the PowerPoint presentation, but like those search strategy worksheet that I mentioned that I showed you earlier, it's right here. So all the links are here. There's a lot more information on the individual steps to consider for you. I just wanted to show you that those were available to you. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. I will say that if you need extra help, you can either, if you're like, how do I find this article? Or do you guys have this article? You can either email our main library at this email or give them a call because the library is open. And we have 2 librarians that are our research librarians. So you have Karine Fournier or Nigel Langlois. So they both speak French and English, and they both have experience doing reviews. I will say right now, if you're hoping to have a librarian as a co-author, there is a wait list just because we are so busy with the amount of reviews that we have. So there is a wait list that sometimes can take a month. So end of November is kind of what we're looking at now. So I wanted to mention that. And then these are the different references. So that is the end of my presentation. I am wondering if there are any questions or conversations around reviews or beyond that that maybe I can answer.
And I want to talk more like, okay, we've done our scoping review and now we want to publish it. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on, for example, using the Prisma checklist, right? And is this something that you recommend going through before pressing that submit button to whatever journal you're?
100%. I actually recommend that when you are writing your protocol. So when you write your protocol, there is a Prisma statement. It's called Prisma Protocol. That is a checklist. It has an explanation. There's a paper that's been written on it for each section explaining why you want to include this information. And then it has a checklist so that as you're writing, you can kind of use it as a guide. Okay. It's not how to write a protocol, but it's like, oh, these are the details in each section that I should include for my protocol. And within your protocol, I also recommend in your methods section that you say, when we go to write our systematic review, our scoping review, we will also be guided by the scoping review the Prisma for the scoping review. So you already know, which also has a very similar checklist, but specific to a scoping review, right? So you definitely want to use it at the very, very beginning, because then it'll just make sure that you're not missing any of the important elements. And there has been, I'm just going to push this one. There's a Prisma Search. So for librarians or people that are doing, when you're trying to be transparent for your methods on where you did your gray literature searching, how you reported it, what databases you used, a lot of journals are getting more picky about those details because they're like, you need to be transparent. And so one of the things about transparency is there's Prisma Search. So it outlines, again, with a really handy checklist. I love checklists. A really handy checklist. Did you like, what databases did you search? What years did you search the databases in? When you did gray literature searching, like what websites did you search? What keywords did you use? It may seem like a lot, but if I'm going to go replicate a search that you did 3 years ago, I need all those details to be able to do it properly. So 100%, I recommend it at the beginning of every stage.
I saw another, just a comment about the review team. It was under scoping reviews, you recommended a statistician, but I'm assuming that's really more for a systematic review?
Yeah, sorry. Yes. So when I was going through these slides, when you like, so when I say you would probably want a method expert in maybe qualitative when you're doing the scoping review. So not necessarily a statistician, but someone who understands qualitative, because like as librarians, I'm a methodology specialist, but I don't have that, well, I'm working on it, but I don't have that qualitative know-how, right? So instead of a statistician, you would probably want a qualitative expert. Yes, that's a good, thank you for that distinction.
I just wanted to check with you about the peer reviewing process of the literature that we do, especially with the COVID pandemic. I'm coming across a lot of publications that are not necessarily peer reviewed. Is there a very easy way to identify how well the publication is without having to go into every journal and checking, the listing for it? Thank you.
I think I know. Okay, I'm going to answer your question how I think you asked it, but if not, please let me know. So I think you're asking, how do I know if, like, for example, a study is well conducted? Is that what you're asking, Haneda? I'm sorry if I misunderstood.
Yes, sort of, because I'm coming across a lot of articles that are not necessarily excellent quality, although they are within, good journals, more or less. So is there a way of checking the quality of these publications?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So oftentimes when I am checking, for example, I can't speak to, RCTs or anything like that, because that's not my area of expertise. But when I am looking at a review and I want to check the quality of the review, oftentimes what I always do is I will so there is a tool that you can use called the AmStar 2, which is a tool that checks the quality of systematic reviews. There is not a tool yet for scoping reviews, at least not that I've heard of. Okay, but you can use the AmStar 2 to check. They have a list of questions that will allow you to look at, at least to see that all of the elements in a systematic review are included, right? So that's one way of doing an appraisal or an evaluation of it. Honestly, what I do is I just take the Prisma checklist and I read the review, and yeah, AmStar 2, that's right. Exactly like that. Yep. It's an acronym. Yeah. And so what I do is if there is no, like for scoping reviews, there is no tool. So what I will often do is I will just take the Prisma scoping review checklist and I'll just read through it. And I'm like, if you have all of those elements, at least that's a good start. It doesn't mean that the interpretation, it doesn't mean that that is correct, but it means at least they have all of the details that signals to me that they've included the details that I need. So if I need to go for a scoping review and I have someone, if I have some qualitative knowledge, right, at least I can see, okay, this kind of makes sense and that those details are there. With the AmStar 2, it gives a little bit more detail around the stats, which are more important in a systematic review, right? Did they do the stats analysis properly? Did they do the meta-analysis properly? So that's more what the AmStar 2 does. And it has those particular questions. Does that answer your question for reviews anyways? Okay,
Thank
great.
you very much.
Okay. Are there any other, so bear in mind that in November, we're going to be doing the systematic review workshop together for a couple of hours. In September, oh boy, in December, you were going to be doing Zotero and covenants. And what does that entail? How does that work through? And then in January, we're going to be talking about open access, where to publish, how to publish, what do I do with all the publishing? Those big burning questions that you have, those are what we're going to be doing in January. So I'm happy to answer those questions now since we do have time, but I also understand it's the end of the day for a lot of people. So maybe you're just kind of like, cool, this is great. Now I need to go lie down and then email Lindsay or any one of the other librarians. That's okay too.
I'll just ask a question here. I have a clinical problem in my practice that I'm trying to do some literature search for it, but I don't know how to do the Pico in it. Like it is about sleep apnea one of the causes of chronic cough? I noticed that I had over the years many patients with chronic cough, and few of them that by treating sleep apnea actually the chronic cough stopped. So I am trying to search for articles, but the thing is you are seeing here like Pico population intervention comparing and then outcome. I don't know how I can find the keyword using this formula.
Yeah, and so that's a great question. And so that for that framework, Pico, is just one example. There are many frameworks that you can use. I just used it for my clinical question, but you don't have to use it. Even if you just search sleep apnea and coughing, right, in Scopus, right? But Michael, if you need to, you can like schedule a one-on-one consultation with one of our librarians, and they would guide you through how to do the searching for that. So that is something you definitely have available to you. I would just recommend drop them an email. I'll send this to Maddie afterwards, or you can go to our library's website. And what you can do is all of the email for all the librarians are there. You can just email them and they will walk you through your specific question, and they can show you another framework that you can use. So I don't want you to worry that we have the resources available for you. So, or if you drop me an email and I'll forward you, whatever you like.
Thank you. I just thought only Pico, but now
No. Many frameworks. No.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I think we've covered all the questions in the chat. So I thank everyone for attending, and I hope to see some of you or most of you on the November 18th session on systematic reviews.